opening the silence no one dares to face. There are battles that don't begin with weapons, but with a glance, a challenge, a careless word that ignites a storm beneath the surface. You've likely stood in the middle of one, your heart racing, your mind scrambling for the perfect comeback, feeling the weight of having to prove something, as if your silence would be mistaken for defeat. And then someone else enters, not with louder words, but with none at all. They don't argue, don't fight, don't react. They simply observe, and suddenly, your own words feel less certain. This is what Nietzsche pointed to. The moment you feel compelled to react, you've already given away your power. Because real power doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from having no need to participate in one. It comes from control over yourself, your energy, your presence. This is not the silence of weakness. It is the silence of depth, of gravity, of danger. A silence that forces others to confront themselves. A silence that reveals the truth behind the noise. Nietzsche didn't teach how to win debates. He taught how to make every word count or to say nothing when nothing needs to be said. In a world addicted to performance and provocation, the one who knows when to remain still becomes the most dangerous person in the room. This video won't just explain why. It will show you how. Because sometimes, power isn't in what you say. It's in the moment you choose not to say anything at all. The illusion of victory. It begins like this. You walk into a conversation thinking you're about to clarify something. You've got logic on your side. You've rehearsed the facts. And yet within moments, it's no longer a conversation, it's a confrontation. The tension builds. You feel your chest tighten. Every sentence from the other person feels like an attack. So you defend yourself. You sharpen your tone. You push back harder. You try to win. But what if this very act, the need to win, is already your defeat? Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about this trap long before modern psychology put a name to it. To him, the desire to dominate in an argument was not power. It was insecurity masquerading as strength. The more emotionally invested we are in being right, the more we reveal how deeply we fear being wrong. We mistake reaction for control. But in truth, when you're reacting, you're already being led. This is the first illusion, that victory in an argument equals power. It doesn't. Power isn't about volume. It's about direction. And the moment your words are dictated by someone else's provocation, you've lost that direction. You're no longer speaking from vision. You're speaking from defense. Nietzsche believed that true power lies in something else entirely, self-mastery. Not silence for the sake of silence, but restraint that comes from choice. Not to avoid confrontation, but to transcend it. Think of the most commanding people you've met. Were they the loudest? Or were they the ones who seemed immune to chaos, anchored, clear, unmoved? That's not passivity. That's power. And yet we live in a culture that confuses noise with strength. From social media debates to corporate boardrooms, the loudest voice often wins the room but rarely wins respect. We've built a world where being heard is more important than having something to say. Nietzsche saw this as decadence, a decay of values, a weakening of the will. The will to power, as he saw it, wasn't about overpowering others. It was about overcoming yourself, about speaking only when your silence would be mistaken for ignorance, about acting from purpose, not impulse. And this brings us to a difficult question, one that most never dare to ask in the heat of a fight. What am I really trying to win here? Am I seeking truth, or am I just trying not to lose face? Because the truth is, if your identity depends on proving yourself right, you may win the argument, but lose something far more important, your clarity, your control, your inner authority. And that's the part Nietzsche knew best. He understood that the strongest person in the room is not the one who speaks first or even last, but the one who could speak and chooses not to. The one who sees the game unfolding and simply doesn't play. Why we really argue? Most people believe arguments are about facts, about reason, about truth. But that's rarely the case. If it were, the internet wouldn't be overflowing with heated debates where no one learns, no one changes, and everyone leaves more convinced of their own view. Nietzsche saw this long before our modern world turned it into spectacle. He understood that arguments are rarely about what they appear to be. They're not about finding clarity. They're about protecting identity. At the heart of most conflict lies a fear not of being wrong, but of being diminished. We argue because we feel threatened, because admitting someone else might be right feels like surrender, like erasing a part of ourselves. And so we push back, not with openness, but with armor. The words we throw out are not invitations to explore. They're weapons meant to defend the self. Nietzsche would have said, "When your ego is doing the talking." Modern psychology confirms this. It tells us that when people argue, what they're defending isn't a viewpoint, it's a self-concept. That's why political debates turn into shouting matches. That's why religious discussions collapse into judgment. Because we're not debating ideas. We're defending who we think we are. And the irony? The more we defend that false self, the more fragile it becomes. Nietzsche called this the herd instinct, the need to align, to validate, to be seen and affirmed. It drives people not toward truth, but toward comfort, toward social belonging, toward applause. And so we argue not because we care about truth, but because we're terrified of standing alone. The louder we get, the more we betray our fear of silence. Look around and you'll see this everywhere, in classrooms, boardrooms, online platforms. A constant performance of certainty, a desperate hunger to be seen as strong, intelligent, articulate. And yet, beneath it all is something trembling, a hidden fear that we are none of those things. Nietzsche's insight was not just that people argue out of insecurity. It's that they don't even know they're doing it. They believe they're standing up for something real, when in truth, they're just repeating ideas they've absorbed without examination. The herd does not think. It echoes. And echoing is safe. It makes us feel like we belong. But true strength, the kind Nietzsche admired, requires a different courage. The courage to not need applause, to not need validation, to risk being misunderstood, to pause and ask, what if I don't need to prove anything right now? Because the one who needs to prove himself is still owned by something owned by fear, by doubt, by the approval of others. The one who is free has nothing to prove. And so, when you find yourself in a heated moment with the pressure rising and your ego screaming to defend itself, ask yourself, what am I actually protecting? Is it truth? Or just the mask I've mistaken for who I am? Nietzsche believed that the way out of this trap is not through sharper arguments, but through deeper silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but of self-possession. The kind of silence that signals, I know who I am. I don't need you to confirm it. The danger of emotional reactivity. Think of the last time you felt truly provoked. Maybe it was something small, a look, a tone, a phrase that hit a nerve. Your pulse quickened. Your thoughts sharpened into weapons. And before you even realized what was happening, you had already reacted. Words came out. Maybe louder than you intended. Maybe sharper than the moment required. And afterward, whether you won or not, something felt off. That's because emotional reactivity doesn't give us power. It steals it. Nietzsche understood this long before we had language for triggers, for fight or flight, for emotional hijacking. To him, the one who reacts instinctively is not free. They are being moved like a puppet by forces they don't even recognize. And that, in Nietzsche's view, is the opposite of strength. Most people believe that to respond quickly and forcefully is a sign of power. But Nietzsche flipped this idea on its head. To him, real strength is calm. Real power is the ability to delay the reaction long enough to choose, not to suppress emotion, but to stand above it. To observe it, question it, and only act when the action serves something deeper than ego. This is what separates the average from the exceptional. The average person is ruled by emotion. They take offense easily. They lash out. They make decisions in the storm. But the exceptional person, the one Nietzsche called the Bermensch, does not. He doesn't argue just because he can. He doesn't speak just because there's silence to fill. He chooses. And that choice is everything. Modern neuroscience supports this ancient wisdom. When we are triggered, the brain's amygdala floods us with emotion. Our rational mind shuts down. We enter survival mode: fight, flee, freeze. But none of these are states of power. They're states of vulnerability. The reactive person believes they are strong because they are loud, fast, unfiltered. But in truth, they are predictable. And nothing is easier to manipulate than someone who is predictable. Nietzsche's philosophy of power wasn't about dominance. It was about transcendence. Rising above the default settings of the human mind. Becoming not the servant of feeling, but its master. Not by denying it, but by standing still while others are swept away. Picture this. Two people are in conflict. One is animated, raising their voice, using every ounce of energy to dominate. The other is quiet, composed. Their face gives nothing away. Their tone never rises. And yet, every word they speak lands like stone. That person, the one who doesn't flinch, holds the power. Because while one is burning their energy trying to win, the other is conserving theirs, waiting for the precise moment to move. Nietzsche believed that person is not passive. He is dangerous. He is what the herd fears but cannot understand. So here's the real question. Are you reacting or are you responding? Are you driven by the need to protect your image or guided by something more stable, more sovereign? Because in every moment of tension, you have a choice. You can enter the storm or you can become the eye of it. And the person who stands in the eye of the storm still, clear, unaffected, is the one who commands everything around it. The misunderstood will to power. Few ideas in philosophy have been more misinterpreted than Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. To the average reader, it sounds like brute ambition, a thirst to conquer, to dominate, to rise above others. But this reading is shallow. Nietzsche never celebrated tyranny. He wasn't pointing toward the power-hungry dictator or the egocentric genius. What he spoke of was something far more difficult to achieve and far more dangerous to ignore. The inner force that pushes each human being to overcome what they once were. The will to power is not about controlling others. It's about commanding yourself. Not about rising through aggression, but evolving through discipline. It is the spiritual drive that moves us from reaction to creation, from fear to mastery, from chaos to form. In Nietzsche's world, power is not an external prize. It is an internal principle. A force that says, I will not remain as I am. Most people, when confronted, defend who they are. The one governed by will to power doesn't defend. He transforms. While the herd clings to identity, he dismantles his own and rebuilds something stronger. And this is where silence becomes more than a tactic. It becomes a statement. A refusal to be dragged back into the reactive world. A choice to operate from a different altitude. The man who controls himself controls the battlefield, not because he avoids the fight, but because he determines the terms on which it happens. The Bermensch, Nietzsche's vision of the fully realized individual, is not some cold, detached machine. He is alive, burning with creative intensity, but never consumed by noise. He listens before he speaks. He observes before he acts. He waits, not out of fear, but out of intent. Every word, every step, is sharpened by vision. This is the paradox. Those who have the greatest inner force often appear the calmest on the surface. They don't tremble when challenged. They don't flinch when misunderstood. Because their power is not borrowed from opinion, it is built from within. We live in a world obsessed with appearances. Loudness is mistaken for leadership. Reaction is mistaken for authenticity. But Nietzsche saw that true authority requires depth. And depth is silent. Depth doesn't need applause. Depth doesn't scramble to prove. When you act from the will to power, you don't speak to be heard, you speak to shape. You don't argue to be right, you act to become. This is the part most people miss. They want control, but not the cost of becoming the kind of person who no longer needs to control. They want power, but not the self-overcoming that makes it possible. So here's the reflection. In your life right now, are you trying to win or are you trying to transform? Because transformation is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It happens in the silence between who you were and who you are becoming. And when you understand that, you realize what Nietzsche really meant. The most powerful people are not those who force the world to listen. They are those who have learned to listen to themselves so completely that the world has no choice but to follow. Power and practice, Socrates, Jobs, Musashi. Philosophy means nothing unless it can be lived. Nietzsche never wanted his ideas to stay trapped in books. He wanted them embodied in action, in conflict, in creation. That's why the concept of the will to power finds its truest expression not in essays, but in the lives of those who mastered themselves so fully, they reshaped the world around them without raising their voice. Socrates, Steve Jobs, Miyamoto Musashi. 3 men from different centuries, different cultures, and different callings, but each one a mirror of Nietzsche's ideal, the person who doesn't dominate through noise, but through inner command. Socrates never claimed to be wise. He simply asked questions, and that's what made him dangerous. In the public squares of Athens, he would find the proudest, most certain men, the politicians, the poets, the teachers, and with nothing more than a series of calm, relentless questions, he would dismantle their confidence. Not by attacking, but by making them confront their own contradictions. His method, now called the Socratic method, was not about proving others wrong. It was about making them realize that they had never really examined what they believed. He exposed the emptiness behind loud certainty, and he did it without ever raising his voice. That is power. Silent, psychological, enduring. Now, fast forward 2 millennia. Steve Jobs, standing at the helm of Apple, wasn't just a tech visionary. He was a master of controlled conflict. He didn't waste energy on small arguments. He let people talk. Let them resist. Let them think they were in charge of the conversation. And then, at the right moment, he would shift everything with a single insight. Take the creation of the iPhone. His team wanted buttons. He wanted a screen. Instead of fighting, he planted seeds. He let the room debate itself into exhaustion until his vision became the only path forward. People didn't feel defeated. They felt inspired. They believed the idea was theirs. That's influence. That's psychological timing. That's the will to power in motion, not through aggression, but through design. And then there's Musashi, the undefeated samurai who won more than 60 duels. But his greatest victories weren't with the blade. They were before the fight ever began. In his most famous duel against Sasaki Kojiro, Musashi arrived hours late, provoking his opponent into rage. Kojiro, once calm and precise, entered the fight unbalanced, consumed by anger. And in that vulnerable state, he was easily defeated. Musashi had already won, not with strength, not with speed, but with psychology, with patience, with silence. That is the kind of power Nietzsche pointed to, the power that doesn't need to strike first, because it knows exactly when to strike last. Each of these men embodied a simple but forgotten truth, that real power is never desperate. It never needs to prove. It doesn't shout to be recognized. Instead, it shapes the room by refusing to be shaped by it. Nietzsche's Bermensch doesn't seek conflict, but neither does he avoid it. He enters only when the outcome matters, and leaves when the noise no longer serves his purpose. He is not silent because he is afraid. He is silent because he has already chosen where to direct his fire. So ask yourself, are you the one who reacts or the one who waits? Are you defending a point or guiding a process? Are you speaking because you must or because your silence has already shifted the room? Strategic silence as psychological warfare. Silence has a reputation for weakness. In a world obsessed with quick responses, instant opinions, and endless noise, to stay silent feels like surrender. But Nietzsche knew better. He understood that silence is not emptiness. It is tension. And tension, when used correctly, is power. The kind of power that makes others reveal themselves while you reveal nothing. The kind that turns every second of quiet into a mirror the other person cannot escape. Strategic silence is not retreat. It is a calculated move, a test of composure, a trap disguised as stillness. Imagine this: you're in a room with two people. One talks endlessly, explaining, defending, spinning narratives. The other listens, not passively but actively. Their eyes are steady, their posture unmoving. They respond only when necessary, and when they do, their words cut like precision tools. Who holds the real power in that room? It's not the one who fills the silence. It's the one who controls it. Nietzsche would call this the expression of inner will. Modern psychologists call it high-status behavior. Whatever you call it, the effect is the same. The calm person draws focus. The reactive one bleeds credibility. Silence amplifies what others say. It forces them to confront the echo of their own words. This is why interrogation experts and negotiators are trained not to interrupt. They know people fear empty space. They rush to fill it. And when they do, they often reveal more than they intended. Their justifications unravel. Their emotions leak out. Their insecurities surface. And the one who waited, who said nothing, now knows exactly where to strike. Silence, when mastered, becomes diagnostic. It tells you what the other person is afraid of, what they want, what they're trying to hide. But it also does something deeper. It creates unease. Humans are wired to find comfort in predictability. We feel safe when we can read others. But the person who stays still, who doesn't flinch, doesn't over-explain, doesn't rush to smooth things over, becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability triggers uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to doubt. Doubt leads to imbalance. This is psychological warfare at its most elegant. No raised voice. No threats. Just presence. Just restraint. Nietzsche saw silence not as passive avoidance, but as active dominance. He believed that true power isn't noisy, it's selective. It speaks only when it serves something higher than ego. In silence, you are not disengaged. You are positioning, preparing, deciding. And when the time comes, your words land harder, cut deeper, and shift more than paragraphs of reactive speech ever could. This is not about manipulation. It's about mastery of self, of timing, of energy. It's about recognizing that in any exchange, the person who controls their own impulses sets the frame for the entire interaction. So next time you feel the pressure to speak, to defend, to explain, to win, pause. Ask yourself, is my silence a sign of fear, or is it a signal of power? Because when used with purpose, silence is not what you withhold. It's what you wield. And often, the quietest person in the room is the only one everyone is actually listening to. Modern bias and the death of dialogue. We live in an age where everyone has a voice, but almost no one listens. Platforms that promised connection have delivered conflict. Discussions that once sought truth now seek validation. It's not that people are incapable of deep thinking. It's that we've created a culture where deep thinking is drowned out by speed, noise, and performance. Nietzsche predicted this collapse long before it arrived. He called it decadence, the slow decay of values, of discipline, of the inner life. And at the center of this decay is our addiction to being right. When people argue today, they rarely do so to understand. They argue to perform, to signal belonging, to score points in a game that has no finish line. Cognitive biases run the show. Confirmation bias filters out anything that doesn't fit our beliefs. The backfire effect makes us double down when we're challenged. The Dunning-Kruger effect convinces us we understand far more than we do. And algorithms, designed to reward outrage, ensure that the loudest voices rise while the most thoughtful are buried. Nietzsche didn't live to see Twitter or TikTok, but he knew what was coming. A time when the herd would dominate not by force, but by volume. And the cost? Dialogue dies. Disagreement becomes identity. Curiosity is replaced by defensiveness. The person who questions is labeled a threat. The person who stays silent is seen as weak. But Nietzsche's silent trick, his invitation to restraint, becomes more relevant than ever. Because when everyone is talking, the one who waits becomes rare. The one who watches becomes dangerous. The one who pauses before reacting becomes unforgettable. In this landscape, power no longer belongs to those who argue well. It belongs to those who know when the argument itself is unworthy of their energy. Nietzsche didn't call for disengagement from society, he called for elevation above it. To become someone who is not ruled by noise. Someone who doesn't mistake stimulation for meaning. Someone who chooses silence, not out of apathy, but out of respect for what words are meant to carry. Modern dialogue is sick because it has lost its sense of sacredness. We speak not to connect, but to compete. But imagine if every word you spoke had to earn its place. Imagine if silence wasn't awkward, but respected. That's what Nietzsche meant by the death of shallow discourse. He saw that when people fear being misunderstood more than they fear misunderstanding others, conversation breaks. And when that happens, truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is who wins the moment. But you, if you're listening to this, already sense the fatigue. The emptiness of having the last word. The hollowness of winning arguments that mean nothing. Nietzsche offers another way. Not to disengage, not to surrender, but to rise. To choose stillness over spectacle. And to realize that in a world drunk on expression, the one who can remain inwardly silent holds a kind of power that cannot be argued away. Silence is not passivity, it's preparation. Many people mistake silence for weakness. They see it as withdrawal, as indecision, as fear. But Nietzsche saw something else, something sharper, deeper, and far more dangerous. To him, silence was not the absence of power. It was its preparation. The space in which clarity is forged, impulses are tempered, and intention is honed. In a world that demands constant reaction, to be still is not to retreat. It is to sharpen the blade before it is drawn. It is the discipline of the mind refusing to act until the moment is right. And that kind of patience is not born from hesitation. It's born from mastery. Look closer at the people we've already studied: Socrates, Steve Jobs, Musashi. None of them were passive. They were poised. Every silence was a calculation. Every pause had purpose. Socrates asked questions that hollowed out arrogance. Jobs orchestrated entire conversations by choosing when not to speak. Musashi defeated enemies before the duel even began by unsettling them with his stillness. This is not inaction. This is dominance, delayed until it becomes inevitable. Nietzsche would say, the one who waits in silence is not waiting for permission. He is waiting for alignment. Inner, outer, strategic, we are conditioned to believe that silence is losing. That if we don't respond immediately, we've been outsmarted, outmaneuvered. But true power doesn't need to defend itself against every provocation. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't explain. It waits. And when it moves with precision. Because power without direction is noise, but power held in reserve, that is something else entirely. That is a storm behind still water. That is the discipline of the Bermensch, the one who has overcome the instinct to prove and instead cultivated the capacity to choose. Modern life punishes this kind of silence. Social media platforms reward speed over depth. Conversations are measured in reaction times, not reflection. But consider this, when you enter a moment of tension and you choose not to respond immediately, something changes. You become unpredictable. You create discomfort. You make others confront their own uncertainty. This is how influence begins, not with more speaking, but with more seeing. More sensing, more stillness before motion. Silence is not a pause in the battle. It is part of the battle. It is the breath before the blow, the stillness before the strike, the refinement of will before its release. Nietzsche understood that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one making threats. It's the one whose silence you can't read, because that silence could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. So when you next feel the urge to fill the space, ask yourself, am I speaking from strength or from fear? Am I acting to assert control or to compensate for its absence? Because silence, when chosen consciously, becomes the highest form of intention, And those who master it are not withdrawing from the world. They are preparing to shape it. When to engage, when to retreat. Silence is power, but not all silence is equal. Some silence is fear pretending to be wisdom. Some withdrawal is cowardice dressed in stoicism. Nietzsche understood this nuance well. He didn't advocate for avoiding conflict at all costs. He wasn't preaching quietism. He knew that some battles are essential, not to prove something to others, but to prove something to ourselves. The will to power isn't about avoiding resistance. It's about mastering it. Choosing which battles refine you and which only deplete you. The Bermensch Nietzsche's vision of the fully formed human doesn't run from difficulty. He moves toward it, but only when it serves his transformation. He doesn't argue to satisfy his ego. He engages when the moment sharpens his thought, deepens his understanding, or shifts the balance of influence. That's the difference between power and performance, between the one who fights to be seen and the one who fights to become. So when should you speak? When should you engage? When does silence serve strength, and when does it simply avoid discomfort? Here are 4 guideposts. First, engage when the conflict sharpens your mind. If the tension forces you to refine your beliefs, to examine your assumptions, to become more aware, then the battle is worth entering. Second, engage when the argument reveals deeper truths, not when it recycles shallow opinions or protects fragile egos. Third, engage when the outcome shifts real power, when something meaningful is at stake. Not just your pride, not just applause, but influence, direction, impact. And fourth, disengage when the energy spent leads nowhere, when the other person is not open, when the conversation is no longer about ideas, but about identity defense. Nietzsche saw that many people waste their strength on the wrong fights. They engage to soothe insecurity, not to build mastery. They argue because they cannot bear to be silent, not because they have something worth saying. That's the trap. The need to be right becomes a leash. And the person who is truly strong never argues from that place. But that doesn't mean they never argue at all. Socrates engaged. Jobs confronted. Musashi fought. But they chose their conflicts, like a sculptor chooses his tools intentionally, sparingly, and with precision. They didn't fight to prove their worth. They fought to shape the world. That is the essence of strategic conflict. Not reaction, not retreat, but engagement as evolution. Most people are exhausted not because they fight too many battles, but because they fight the wrong ones. They pour their energy into defending an image, a narrative, a self they barely understand. But the person who pauses, who watches, who waits, gains the clarity to know when a fight is truly worthy. And in that clarity, they become something few people ever are: dangerous without being aggressive, powerful without being loud, present without being reactive. So before your next argument, ask yourself, is this sharpening me? Or is it draining me? Is this an opportunity to grow or just a rehearsal of old fears? Because true power is not in always speaking or always staying silent. It's in knowing the difference. The final blade words as currency. Imagine this. One morning, you wake up to a voice inside you saying, you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. Every sentence now has weight. Every phrase must count. Would you waste them in a heated argument? Would you use them defending yourself to someone who never intended to understand you? Or would you begin to speak like a sculptor, cutting away everything unnecessary until only what is essential remains? This is not a fantasy. It is a thought experiment. And it is precisely how Nietzsche believed we should approach our lives. With intentionality, with precision, with restraint forged in self-mastery. In a culture that spills words by the millions, we forget their cost. We speak to fill space, to avoid silence, to protect identity. But every time we speak from compulsion, we weaken the impact of our voice. Words, like currency, lose value when spent carelessly. Nietzsche's wisdom was not to hoard silence, but to raise the stakes of speech. To speak only when the moment has earned it. to ensure that what leaves your mouth reflects not your fear, not your impulse, but your will. And this brings us to the final trick, the one most people will never practice. Before you speak, stop. Ask yourself, who truly holds the power here? Is it the one frantically defending a position, or the one who can sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood? Is it the one who races to prove their point, or the one who knows that timing speaks louder than truth shouted too soon? Nietzsche understood that silence is not always the answer, but it is always a question, a test. Why am I about to speak? Is it to serve something higher, or just to silence my own discomfort? Is it to shape the world, or to shield myself from it? Most people are slaves to that discomfort. They can't bear silence. They can't bear being misread. And so they speak not from power, but from pressure. But the person who doesn't speak until the silence has done its work, that person doesn't just win the argument. They reshape the entire frame in which the argument exists. The true challenge, then, is this: to live as if your words were limited. To speak like each one carries weight. To choose them not to protect your ego, but to shape your reality. The greatest thinkers in history, Socrates, Musashi, Nietzsche himself, they didn't waste their words. They knew when to challenge and when to hold back. They used silence to draw out weakness. They used words to move the world. So here is the final reflection. Every moment is an invitation to speak, but not every moment deserves your voice. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more depth, more restraint, more words that come from mastery, not from impulse. The next time you find yourself on the edge of reaction, pause, observe, let others reveal themselves. And then, when the time is right, speak like a warrior, unsheathing his final blade deliberate, precise, unforgettable. Because in the end, true power isn't in the noise you make. It's in the silence you've earned. And when you finally choose to break it, the world listens.